As musicians, we've probably all reached a place where our creative flow feels blocked and we're just not feeling all that inspired. And maybe it's just a problem of getting to work and having a motivation to be productive. In this episode, we're going to talk about 10 ways where you can get unstuck and back on track.
You're listening
to the CD Baby
CD Baby
CD Baby
DIY
Musician
Podcast.
Hey there, and welcome to episode 289 of CD Baby's DIY Musician Podcast, where today we're going to be talking about 10 creative challenges to get you out of your songwriting rut. We're going to be talking about ways to write better songs or maybe create better recordings more often. My name's Chris Robley, and joining me today is Christina Cano. What's up, Christina?
Hey, Chris. How you doing?
I'm good. I'm excited to talk to you specifically about this topic because I know it's like one of your favorite things of all time to talk about.
Number one favorite thing to talk about of all time. So thanks for having me.
Yeah. I think for this episode, I guess first we should say Kevin's not here because he's a little under the weather. So we are commandeering the podcast again. But I think we can just jump into the topic, and we have 10 ways to get unstuck in a creative rut. And you contributed the first 5 and I did the second 5. And yours, I think, mostly stem from creative challenges, like official creative challenges you have embarked upon.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to hear because I think all of them led you to some lesson that people can apply, even if they're not doing that specific challenge. So do you want to kick it off?
Absolutely. So the first one that I really enjoy, it's also the first sort of songwriting creative challenge that I've ever done, is something called the 20 song game. So the idea behind that is you wake up at like 6 or even earlier if you're an early bird, and you make yourself some coffee, you get your water, you get your breakfast, and then you dive into a 12-hour songwriting session where you write 20 songs in 12 hours. Generally, you'll do this maybe with a few other people also doing it on their own, and you can like check in on each other during the day. And then if you're in the same city, you can come together at the end of those 12 hours and sort of listen to each other's ideas just to like as a support group. But it is such a great experience. The first time I did it with 2 other musicians, and I probably got to like 12 songs. You know, a lot of the point of these sorts of challenges is to push yourself to get there, but also be okay with what the end result is. So 12 songs, and I would say one of them ended up becoming like a pretty standard single. It was a single, but it also became like a big standard in my repertoire. So I find these challenges to be so incredible because it's sort of like mining for gold. You're just in the dirt, you know, and your brain is just like, you can't really judge what comes out. It's sort of like, this seems like crap, but I have to keep going. Like you got to keep making it, record it, move on, record it, move on.
Wow.
So
I'm terrible at math, but what does that work out to be if you were to actually succeed in the 20 songs? It'd be
it's about 2 songs an hour.
2 songs, a little more less than 2 songs. That's crazy.
And sometimes you'll find yourself stuck for like 3 hours on one thing and you're like, I don't have time for this, you know? So as a songwriter, there are so many things about this challenge that are my favorite. I do it maybe once to twice a year. And actually I'm due for one soon. So maybe you and I can do it soon.
So I think what you were saying is basically the biggest lesson you learned from this particular challenge is to not judge your work as it's coming out and let it be bad, or maybe not even bad, but just let it be.
Let it be. And also you find that you take way bigger risks than you normally would, or you just sort of like, you lean into a silly side or you lean into a more adventurous side. And I've done this now so many times, and every single time that I've done it, I've come away with one song that I'm like, oh, hell yeah, where did that come from? You know, the first time I did it, I was like, had probably like 4 p.m. and I was like panicking. I was like, I'm never going to make it, blah, blah. I had just like been in the zone for 8 hours and I was just like tired mentally. It's like a marathon, you know? And then I took an outside break and I brought my guitar. It's actually the one that's right over here, my little baby guy outside. And I was just like sitting out there and taking a mental break. And in that mental break, I wrote one of my favorite songs in 1 minute. Just like
Wow.
came out and I was like, oh my gosh, and there it is. And now like that, I put it on my first ever album, and it was so quick to write because I think I had just done a marathon,
Well, that's that sort of cliche like eureka moment when people finally give up and rest or back away from the problem.
Exactly.
Suddenly their brain is like freed up to actually solve the problem. That's
Yeah,
really cool.
like your body, when you are in extreme exercise mode, that rest days are actually the best days for your body to just like rejuvenate your cells or do all the good stuff that you've been working towards. So that's one of those things that happened. I was just like, I love that.
I think personally, one of the things I would struggle with is I don't know if this is a matter of just because my time is sort of scarce. So when I'm devoted to writing or recording, I want it to be not just productive, but producing something I will hold on to.
Right.
So the ability to throw things away after an event like that I would find very difficult. Yeah. But how is that for you?
That part is hard, especially with some of the other challenges I'll talk about today, where you're producing mass quantities of ideas, and there's just no feasible way that you're going to likely get them out into the public unless you're spending every single day of your life.
Uh-huh.
It is hard. And sometimes you've written this idea and then you hope that you'll come back to it. And if you do come back to it, it could be like a year later, and it's really hard to get back into that headspace. So definitely set up a game plan for yourself once you've done this sort of big mental exercise, to maybe have a week in between because your brain needs a minute to rest, and then set up a game plan on how you'll follow up with those songs that you know that you want to develop or record or get your band to learn or whatever, so that way you're not throwing these babies away.
Yeah. Well, that seems like a good segue to the second thing on your list, which is called FOM. What the hell is FOM?
Okay. I have a feeling a lot of people in our DIY musician community probably know what it is or have at least heard about the idea, but to give you a little bit of background, it is a creative challenge, much like the first one I talked about, except it takes place over a month. So you have 1 month to create 14 new songs. Generally, the rules are that you do one song for 2 days, move on, one song for 2 days, move on. There's actually a whole online community that does this together. You can be sharing your music with that community, or you can break off into micro groups, which is generally what I'll do. I work with a few other people that are doing the same challenge. We all know each other, trust each other, and upload whatever new song of that period of time into like a shared Bandcamp or a shared SoundCloud or something private, so that we can all hear each other's progress. And then once again, at the end of the month, you have this collection of songs to sort of sift through and see if there's gold. Every time I do these challenges, there's at least one thing that I'm like, yeah, sometimes more. So the thing that I definitely recommend with this one is sort of pushing yourself to maybe tackle a songwriting obstacle that's been, getting in your way, or maybe set up a few limitations for yourself, saying like, I'm only going to play, like, for example, I'm going to do this in February. You and I have talked about doing this challenge.
Oh, wait, to interrupt for a second, the February is the F of FOM, right? So it's February album writing month?
Right.
Okay.
So yeah, by the end of the month, you should have like an album's worth of music, which is amazing. And some people definitely just stick to it and they're like, this is it. I am actually literally writing an album. Some people are just looking for 14 songs that they can figure out which one is the right one to develop. Some people are just using it as a writing exercise to like hone their skills. So it's an incredible challenge. And are you looking forward to it?
Well, so I am, except I might cheat and treat it as a completely different objective. I know you're going to try and talk me out of that, but I want to use it as a chance to record 14 songs.
Great.
So I'll twist the rules a little bit.
I think this is a good segue also into the point of these challenges. So everybody's going to come in with a different goal. No artist is coming from the same objective in their music path. So if your goal is, I have 14 songs that I need to record, or 14 songs I need to develop, or whatever, like, that's fine. At the end of the day, you're doing something every day and you're setting a path for yourself to be more prolific and have more productivity. And I think that that's great.
Yeah. And it seemed like the lesson you learned from this one is just pressure is more than okay, it's good. You have to have a deadline. You have to have an objective in order to, feel the squeeze basically and get stuff done.
This is the first time that I'm going to try to play the game following the rules. I've done this before. Similar to you, I did one, now I guess it would be a few years back, where this last album I put out last year was a product of me developing all of my songs in a month. So I had already had a bunch of ideas that were just sort of floating around in notebooks and sessions and whatever, and or in my head. And I was like, I'm going to spend this month developing 14 of these songs to then put an album out. So this time, next month, in a few days, I have to try the come up with 14 songs out of thin air approach, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I guess by the time this episode airs, it might be underway. So the third thing on your list is 30 or 60 day challenge, writing a song a day. What's different about that?
Okay, so that one is like next lev. Okay, I did this challenge about 8 years ago. And then since then, I've hosted it twice. The concept behind this challenge is you and a larger group of people. I've done it with starting with 15 people. I've done it with starting with 40 people. And during 2020, we did about 40 people from all over the world. And it was really, really cool and really, really fun. And basically what you're going to do is you're going to write a song every single day and record it and share it for 60 days. But no matter what is happening that day, whether you're on a road trip or you're having a stressful day or it's been a day full of meetings or whatever, you find 1 hour in that day to go write something. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be the next best single. It doesn't have to be your opus. It can just be a voice memo recording of you and your guitar writing about how stressful your day was, but you're putting your mind in the mindset of a working artist that does this every day. And by the end of it, it's boot camp. I mean, you're basically by the end of it, like a buff ass musician. So
well, I've heard Randy Newman talk about his songwriting process. And, he's a guy who puts out very little music. He might put out an album every 5 or 6 years or something like that. But he sits down at his piano, on this schedule. It's I don't know what actually is. Maybe it's every day from 9 a.m. to noon or something. But every day he sits there. And if nothing comes, well, that's fine. He still sits at his damn piano and tries to tinker, works. Maybe he throws it all out. But it's just about that daily habit. And I like in this long triple marathon kind of challenge that you're talking about, they don't actually probably all have to even be, quote, songs. I'm imagining someone is all I've got is 30 seconds of something.
That happens all the time.
That's totally what I have. Here it is.
Every time. I mean, there are limitations to it. There are rules that you have to follow. And it's sort of dependent on who's hosting. I've been in ones where they said instrumentals don't count, which I don't really buy because I have a lot of friends that are producers or they make music that isn't vocal, and so I wanted them to be able to enjoy this challenge. But one of the rules is you have to produce something, you have to record it, it has to be at least 30 seconds, and if you miss 3 days out of the challenge, you're cut.
You get the boot.
You get the boot. You do get Sundays off, so it's Monday through Saturday. You get Sundays off, but you can't miss more than 3 days. If you miss those 3 days, you get the boot. And so usually you start off with 30 or 40 people and you end up with 4 to 5 diehard.
The true believers. Yeah.
I think the best part and one of the reasons why I host it is because I know that I have the ability to be lazy too. I wouldn't want to do that every day, but it's sort of the stakes are higher if you're the one who can get to have to.
Yeah, and I'm seeing the lesson from this one being slightly different than applying pressure. It is about obviously applying pressure long term, but it's more about habituating yourself to push through the laziness or any of the momentum that might be I just want to watch a show or any of the other 1,000 things we could do with our life.
And we all have it. Every single one of us has it. I think being lazy comes natural to absolutely everybody. It's not there's something wrong with you because you don't want to do it today. There's nothing wrong with you. It's just you have to do it. Do it.
Right.
You just do it, Nike it, then you'll be proud of yourself. The confidence will come back. You're likely to shake something up in your being that is going to prepare you for later on when you want to be more prolific. There's also people that I know that have used this as an opportunity to maybe try experiment. Like one week they're going to try this genre, and then the next week they'll try that genre, and then the next week they'll try taking on a persona like another artist, and seeing those sorts of fun experiments happen over the course of this generally 8-week process is really, it's fun to as an observer, and I'm only imagine it's super fun as an artist to like sort of try on different hats or try a different technique. Maybe
Yeah.
week you just do instrumentals, and then the next week you just do ambient music, and then the next week you really lean in on your folk songwriting. So.
Yeah, that's cool. And it also sort of segues to the next thing on your list in terms of trying on different hats and personas, because you suggested people try to cover an entire album
Yeah,
by
I
a
actually
different artist.
had this one. I just came up with this idea.
I have friends who've done this. A guy named Dave Depper has
Mhm.
recreated Paul McCartney's Ram. He did it again in the last few months.
Great.
He did Moon Safari by Air. I know John Vanderslice recreated Diamond Dogs by David Bowie. It's a band called Lowland Hum that redid Peter Gabriel's So recently. There's a lot of bands that do this, but I have never done it yet, but I really want to recreate Paul Simon's Hearts and Bones album,
Oh,
which
cool.
I feel like it's his best songs, but just suffered from like 80s production. A
Yeah,
little too shimmery reverb and cheesy guitar tones and stuff.
it's a fun challenge. I've been talking about it for years. I'm not going to say the album I want to cover because I need to keep it precious, but I've been talking about it for years, and it's something that I think is a really great way to get yourself out of whatever your creative limitations might be. Like maybe you're a multi-instrumentalist, but you've just been like focused on the guitar, and you really need to spend some time working with your synth, and you want to recreate this like legendary synth album, or or maybe there's something that you don't know how to play, and now this sort of pushes you in the direction of having to sort of teach yourself how to play something. And it doesn't have to sound great. You don't have to show anyone this full album that you recreated. I also like this idea because I think that on every album there's like sort of a variety. And so there might be like songs you absolutely hate, but trying to dissect them and like see how they made them and recreate them might be a fun challenge. And working with other artists, like maybe you don't play drums, but you could get some guy who does or lady who does to like come in and try that, and now you've made a new artist friend.
Yeah. I mean, in the specific example of the album I want to record, I think one of the benefits, besides just exploring the music, having something that I could potentially release, I think I would learn an awful lot about how chord changes work.
Yeah.
That's one of my areas that I feel competent in. I've got like a jazz background. I know some fancy chords and stuff. But Paul Simon, just within the context of pop and folk and rock music, did really amazing chord stuff without it ever really sounding sophisticated. Like it's sophisticated because it sounds simple, but it's completely not. And I think I would learn a lot by dissecting that kind of architecturally and then having to piece it back together.
Or arrangement. I think that's a big one.
Mm-hmm.
Not to get too personal, but for me, I'm like, I get really stuck in that A B structure, and I really need to shake that up. So maybe trying on a hat from somebody who that they have like a really dynamic arrangement style or something is a good idea.
Yeah, your next suggestion I was surprised to see on the list because I know you normally hate jamming, but you said
I
play
do.
in someone else's writing project or jam.
Okay, so that one also came from experience. I used to find that when I was playing in someone else's band, I was a touring musician in someone else's band for a while. So, in other words, I've played in bands where all of us are have creative input. I lead my own band, but I'm sort of like the head songwriter. But so I was in someone else's band where they were the head songwriter, and I was like sort of the side man, just the keyboard player. And I would find that my moments of great inspiration came at sound check or at their band practice.
Uh-huh.
Those moments in between band practice where you're just like noodling, and I'd be like, oh, that's actually really good. But it's because your brain isn't so focused on what am I making? Is this amazing? Is this genius? you're just sort of on autopilot or working with someone else or getting creatively inspired by someone else's style. That stuff
So
happens.
when you'd find those little moments, like whether it's at practice or at a sound check, would those things then get stored away for your own music later, or were you working that into someone else's music in the moment?
No, I was trying really hard not to put too
Ah,
much of my stuff into someone else unless they wanted that, But there was a tour where I workshopped a song every night in those moments at soundcheck where you're just standing around for an hour, and I had headphones, I just put them into my keyboard so that no one else had to hear it. And I would just workshop this song while they're testing the drums or testing the bass or whatever. So it was like a month long of writing, but it was because I wasn't dedicating that time necessarily to like, this needs to happen,
yeah. It was a good use of time too. Better than just sitting listening to the kick drum.
which can get monotonous and drive you crazy.
Yeah, I mean, in my case, I've been a side person, a session player in tons of bands and tons of recording projects, but I'm very, very aware of how those experiences made me a better guitar player or a better keyboard player, or maybe understand theory. I've never actually asked myself the question how it affected my writing at all. I mean, I'm sure it has.
Well, one thing that I also think is it's important to just enjoy being a musician sometimes, because as writers, there's all this pressure, right? But sometimes just playing music, like remember why you're doing this in the first place. Remember that.
You're talking nonsense now. That's crazy. We're supposed to enjoy ourselves?
I know. Remember that feeling when you first picked up your instrument and you spent hours every night till 3 a.m. until your parents were banging on the door being like, shut up. Remember that feeling where you're just obsessed? If you're in a creative rut and you don't feel obsessed, stop trying and just have some fun. Just do this for fun for a minute. That's my best advice.
It's good. Good advice. All right, that's the halfway point. Now I've got a list of few things.
Hit me.
The first on my list is to emulate your heroes. I think a lot of us think everything we do needs to be like so original, and like nothing we do is all that original. It's fine. Just go ahead and actively try to copy your heroes, because the truth is you will try your best and fail. You're not that person. You've got different talents and different deficiencies. And by aiming to be someone else, if you let yourself do it, you'll miss the target and hopefully arrive somewhere else that might be interesting. And if it's not, just throw it away. It's fine. No one needs to hear it, but actively just go ahead and rip someone else off.
So who would you say is one of your heroes that you tried to emulate?
Radiohead.
Sure.
And somehow, you aim for that, and I ended up 1,000 miles away. But early on, I was trying to emulate Radiohead, and then I'd put the music out, and people would be like, "Oh, this sounds like Bare Naked Ladies." I'm like, "What?" Yeah. Those two bands they are not in the same universe. But
you and I are also both Nielsen fans.
Oh yeah.
I've done that before with Nielsen, where I've been like, I'm going to write a Nielsen song, and then it doesn't sound anything like it. But that's sort of a lesson too, is you can try to be like someone else, but it's always uniquely your own.
Yeah. And speaking of him, his little vocal trumpet effect that he does, I've put that in some of my own songs, and that's always fun. So yeah, borrowing little tropes and stuff. The other bit of advice I have is the opposite. Destroy your heroes.
Okay, wow.
If you are feeling like you're in a rut, do the exact opposite of what you think your heroes would do. You can't escape your influences, and everything you ever do is going to be full of judgments based on your prior taste and influences and all that stuff. But like, let's say you're playing the same finger picking pattern because that's what Bob Dylan and Paul Simon did, and that's who you're influenced. Put the guitar away. Just play an ethereal synth pad or something. Like, go in the opposite direction. Again, you'll mess up, you'll fail, but you might arrive someplace completely interesting. It might still be informed by your influences, but it'll be unlike something you've done before.
Something that I just realized when you were talking about some of the heroes that even just some of your examples, is every single one of those artists has had some sort of arc in their sound. So they were known for this, then they switched to that, and then they maybe experimented with this, and then maybe they come back to what they originally were known for. But like, a lot of us sort of go through these fluctuations, and that's totally normal. So if you idolize the sound one day and then you decide to completely abandon it the next, that doesn't mean that you're not the same artist. It's still you. You're still doing your thing.
Yeah, well, and Kevin and I have answered this question a lot on the podcast. People call in and they wonder if they should change their artist name because they're going in a new direction. And there are definitely times where you will want to do that. Like, if you're putting out a bunch of ambient relaxation, meditation music on Spotify, and then you put out a death metal album, yeah, those are probably different artist names. But by and large, if it's still your songwriting, you're still singing, we always just say, like, think of Joni Mitchell, think of Bob Dylan, think of David Bowie. They all went through very distinct phases where they completely destroyed who they used to be. And some people got pissed off. But when you look at their careers over the long arc of it, they're the same person. They're the same artist. They just went in a bunch of different directions. And that's fine because at the center of it was still that person. So
it's one of my favorite things in an artist, actually, is seeing that variety. One of my favorite artists is Sufjan Stevens, and I've never seen more diversity in the body of work than this artist who does, this like really folksy Carrie and Lowell, but then this crazy Age of Odds, like overproduced records. So I think that having diversity is okay. You can still be the same artist, get inspired by different things. It's all good.
Totally. My next thing is to co-write, which is not something I've done a ton of, and I don't think I'm all that naturally good at it, but it has always been a growth experience, even when somewhat uncomfortable, because I've been so used to being the person who has full say of the artistic direction, the songs, the lyrics. And if I've made compromises in that, it's to include someone else's contribution. Like I might say, that wouldn't have been the drum part I would have played, but I'm going to let them in because they're essentially recording as a friend and I'm not paying them all that. I've made concessions like that, but I've never straight up been like, okay, this is 50-50 our song together. Or actually I have, but not very often. So I think there's something to gain by not having full control.
Yeah, I'm not good at it. This is sort of a hot subject right now because Taylor Swift got really offended.
By Damon Albarn?
Saying that she didn't write her own songs, but the truth is she has a co-writer and she's like, I write, and I think that that's a good point. I'm not like I don't really know Taylor Swift's music, but I also can respect that a co-write is just as much writing. But I personally don't know how to do that. How do you do that?
Well, I do think the people who do it really successfully, like that, the sort of stereotypical Nashville co-write thing, it's like people either live there or they fly in for a long weekend and they set up all these co-writing sessions. And I think it's similar to the stuff you were talking about in the earlier section of this podcast. It's about like volume. We're just going to try a bunch of stuff. Right. We're going to not be attached to the results needing to turn into a song. And hopefully at the end of a 3-day marathon of co-writing with 6 different people, we have one song that we can pitch to whoever.
6 people seems excessive, but then you look at like a Drake album and you're like, whoa. So
yeah.
I think that it's a great idea, and it's also a great way to let go of some of your ego. And again, I'm not good at it. You just admitted that you haven't been the strongest at it either, but it's an obstacle to overcome if you need to be in control all the time.
Yeah, well, so we talked earlier about like the eureka moment where you, the songwriter, is stuck. You free your mind up and eventually the right idea comes in and you're like, oh, cool. But if you imagine the song itself being the thing looking for the solution instead of you, the writer, co-writing can be like speeding up the eureka moment because the person sitting right across from you could instantaneously say, oh, here's my idea to complete where you're stuck or where you left off. Here's the next thing. So it can kind of, when it's going well, it can build the song a lot faster.
And I just said that I don't do it, but I think that even just the nature of being in a band sometimes and being like, you guys can write whatever part you want here. That's co-writing. So make sure that you give your bandmates their due when they're helping you out like that.
Yeah. My next tip is co-write with someone who's dead, which I think is a fun thing to do.
I don't get it.
You can take a line from a poem, assuming it's an old public domain poem or something from an old classical piece that's in the public domain and steal the melody. Like Sting has done that where he took, I think it was a Prokofiev melody and worked it into that song Russians. Like plenty of people just borrow old stuff, use it as a jumping off point, or maybe something in the chorus that you arrive at. Feel free to take old things and work it in. You could even take things like kind of a songwriting form of sampling, take existing stuff that is still copyrighted, but just change it eventually. Like, it can be a jumping off point, and then when you're like, okay, I've got the song mostly done, how can I tweak those things I stole so that now it just is like I'm borrowing them?
I really love this idea because it's sort of paint by numbers a little bit. You know, you have this foundation and then you're filling it in with you, and then you take away that foundation and now you have your own thing. So I think that's a really interesting concept.
Yeah, it's fun. And then you can share credit or not, you know? You probably should, though. It's the good thing to do.
Well, if you sample, please do share credit. You need to.
Yeah, otherwise the algorithms will find you anyways, so.
Find you, they'll hunt you down.
Here's another thing that I find is really inspiring and magical, even though it's just pretty stupid. Like, put the instrument down that you're most familiar with and pick up a different one. And it could be as simple as, oh, I'm used to playing this acoustic guitar. I'm putting that one down and picking up a different acoustic guitar because they've got different sounds. And now you play that same old G chord that you got sick of on the other instrument. And on this new instrument, it's like, whoa, that sounds different. It's even more dramatic when you put down the guitar and pick up a piano. Or, well, don't pick it up, you'll strain yourself, but sit at a piano. Or even like, maybe you don't know how to play violin, but pick up a violin and see what you can do with it. Like, suddenly the most simple, from a music theory standpoint, simple things sound so wild. I think almost every time I do this, I start immediately writing.
Absolutely. There's two things that happen. One, exactly what you said, you get inspired by this new instrument, or you get inspired by like this different machine that you're using. Two is that every time you pick up a different instrument, you're coming at it from a different approach. So I've actually found sometimes that certain things will block my process. For example, I got into Ableton, 5-6 years ago, and around that time, I started trying to write in my computer. What I mean by that is, writing the tracks like in the computer instead of on a machine or on my guitar. And my writing process completely changed. I got really stuck on like little things like finding the right kick drum, or stuck on the production of it, and instead wasn't really writing the most diverse and fleshed out songs.
That's interesting because for me, I tend to write song first outside of the production in the computer, and that sort of campfire mentality of I want this to be a song that sounds interesting, even if it's dumbed down to just an acoustic guitar. But what I want to do is go in that more computer oriented direction, just as a challenge, and like work on that loop based
great
4 measures at a time, because I think it'll make me think about music differently.
It's an endless and like tool. There's so much in there to do. It's just that I found that for me in particular, I was sort of stifling my personal approach to writing. Instead of using it as a tool for production, I was trying to use it as a tool for writing, which is totally, totally capable of if you have the right brain for it. But that being said, and I also really like experimenting with electronic music and all that. And so, but I do think that being able to recognize, oh, this is sort of getting in the way of my process. Like, what's something else I can try? So whether you're not maybe the strongest at keyboard and you're just like, this is something I've always wanted to play better, but it's getting in the way of the way that I'm writing. So I'm going to stick to the guitar, or I'm going to try a different instrument that might be inspiring. We're also like, you and I are multi-instrumentalists. Not everybody may be comfortable like switching up instruments. So maybe find a different one in the same realm. If you're a electronic guitarist, maybe try an acoustic guitar or a classical guitar or a ukulele.
Yeah, well, there's also ways of sort of tampering with your own instrument, like the same acoustic guitar, just put it in an alternate tuning. Or if you play an actual acoustic piano, like you could do prepared piano stuff where you stick paper towels or something in between the strings and put screwdrivers and stuff, and suddenly it sounds like a clunky old honky-tonk piano. Or instead of on an electric guitar, just pick up a slide. There's lots of ways of just taking what you have and changing it.
Or if you are an electronic musician and you have been spending all this time trying to work out like MIDI synth or something, maybe try a different approach from it. Like maybe instead of coming in with MIDI synth, you come in with drums this time, or you come in with just a beat, come in with just the bass, So try like different approaches to how you normally would start your songwriting flow.
that kind of leads to our next one too, in terms of starting from a different place. And what I wanted to suggest is try to borrow constraints from different genres. And so the foundations of hip hop are sampling, right? So short snippets of sound borrowed from some other place. But you might be a folk singer, right? What would happen if your folk song incorporated samples, or you started with samples and then built a folk song on top of it? It can still be folk, but you're borrowing. And then to go the opposite way, like hip hop tends to be fairly repetitive music. What if hip hop instead still focused on groove and all that stuff, but maybe had like a 64 measure chord sequence like they used to do in the old Tin Pan Alley days? So it's this really long form verse, at least in terms of chord changes. Like, I think that would be really cool to begin by saying, I'm still going to be me. I'm still going to make hip hop, or I'm still going to make folk, but I'm just going to do the things that are known in other genres as sort of staples of that music.
Yeah, you don't have to reinvent the wheel with what you're making, but what's one thing you can do today that can make a little bit of a change in your process? That's the whole thing that we're really talking about on this episode. Is there are so many different like approaches. And when you're feeling stuck, I mean, I feel stuck all the time. I go through like these crazy waves where I'm like, yeah, I'm writing a song every day in my head and whatever. But and there are days where it's like, I don't have the drive, I don't have whatever. And then you spiral. And then you're like, I'm not even a musician anymore.
What has my life become?
It's been 1 month, girl. Like, calm down. But in those moments, like, what are these things that you can do? So I think that these are some really great approaches.
My monthly listeners on Spotify dipped 10%. I'm over.
Who cares?
I have one more tip, but before we get to that, I should say you and I also do a lot of talking about Brian Eno's oblique strategies cards. And I feel like this is probably a cliche amongst musicians at this point, but those cards are so cool because, oh, you've got them right there. Look at that.
We can talk about
Viewers on YouTube can see Christina is holding up the very cards we're talking about. But
while I pull them out,
they get so much attention because they get to the heart of everything we're talking about now, putting your mind in a different frame. What's that one say? Don't
be frightened of cliches.
Don't be frightened. They're perfect.
That's our one for today, but we'll pull one
perfect
for the audience.
But yeah, if anyone doesn't know what these cards are, please check them out. You can find versions of them online. They're just sort of abstract prompts.
Ooh.
What?
Good. Use an old idea.
Perfect.
We just talked about this.
Thank you, Brian Eno. Yeah, they just shake things up a little bit, and if you actually stick to it, you have some wiggle room to interpret the instruction however it makes sense.
It's sort of like
strategies.
Tarot cards for the creative brain.
I love that you have those right in front of you.
Well, this is like the music station in my house currently, so they're right there.
My last piece of advice, I think we've gone beyond 10 tips at this point, but is to make a daily habit of whatever it is you're trying to do, recording, writing, even if it's literally 5 minutes long. So I think frequency is more important than the duration. And I say this because about a month ago, I was having a hard time getting my daughter to practice violin. She's 9. Violin's a difficult instrument to make sound good when you're, first learning it. So it's easy to get frustrated, especially when I'm telling her practice a half hour a day or even 15 minutes a day. Like to a 9-year-old, that's an eternity. She just wants to go dance or like watch a show or whatever. So that became super frustrating for her. It became really frustrating for the parents to constantly be trying to convince her to do it. So finally, one day I kind of gave up in a way because I realized this 15 to 30 minute thing was actually turning into her doing that twice a week, kind of like under a lot of duress. So then I said, hey, what if we just did 5 minutes a day? And she's like, okay, 5 minutes. That's like me playing a song twice, right? I'm like, yep. So I tried to take all of the pressure out of it. She knew it was like super manageable. She could tackle it and then treat it as a thing that's like almost a chore. That's fine. But she knows she can get it done quick and then go back to her show or go back to dancing or whatever. And as soon as she started doing this, even though she was playing a lot less, I noticed her tone got better. She got better at figuring things out by ear. She was way more joyful about it. I was like, I know this is like child psychology, but I should apply this to my own damn self because I think, oh, in order to get something done in a recording session, I need at least 4 hours of just uninterrupted sacred time and the world needs to leave me alone. But my life is way too busy to expect that to happen. But if I could do 10 minutes a day and maybe all I get done is I comp one verse of vocals, or I just add a tambourine to one bridge or chorus, like they're going to be small things, but if I do it every day, I'll be way further along than the equivalent of my daughter fighting through the 15 minutes she was expected to do.
I love that. I love that lesson. I love that parental advice. I love everything about that, at self-parenting ourselves to be able to accomplish these small things. I think that you'll also find that if you go in for 5 minutes, next thing you know, it's been 30. You might get lost in it. And that's a great thing to feel again. Feel yourself get lost in it. But also not having too much pressure and just saying, I commit to this. I actually just got myself this journal. It's a journal / planner. It's called the 30 Commit. Yeah, it's online. You can find it. It's really cheap. But it is amazing because it's specifically about accomplishing your goals in 30-day increments. So in other words, if one of your goals is that you're going to play music 5 days a week or 5 minutes a day, you check off that you did that goal that day, and you then sort of reflect and talk about what you learned from the end of that challenge. So it's basically just like a challenge notebook, but I highly recommend it, especially for these things that we're talking about that are like boot camp based. Basically, we're talking about try effort in short bursts and see how it feels to get yourself through.
Does that daily journal focus a lot on sort of time blocking your day?
It does. It actually has your schedule like out by the hour, which is helpful for me to be like, okay, well, I actually don't have as much going on today than like my brain thinks I do. So I might have 4 meetings, but really those 4 meetings they're manageable. They're spread out throughout the day. It still gives me time to go take my walk that I take in the morning. Still gives me time to take my music hour. I really appreciate that because it's very easy for us to get overwhelmed. We're working from home. A lot of us are working from home or parenting from home or teaching from home or whatever. It's very hard to, at the end of the day, find the motivation to be the artist that we are. And so not just the motivation, but the drive and sometimes the confidence, because we've been stuck sort of in this social rut already as a whole world, as a
species. Right.
It's been 2 years of this stuff, right? And let's not blame it on that, but it's been 2 years of this stuff. And so how can we get ourselves reinvigorated and feel alive again and find the space in our days to do that?
Yeah, so at the beginning of the year, which is probably a couple episodes ago at this point, Kevin and I were talking about habits, forming new habits instead of resolutions, instead of it being about the goal, like how to follow the Atomic Habits guideline and time block and all this stuff. And I was like, oh, this is going really well. And then I realized that works well as long as you don't develop any new interests or obsessions. And I started with a whole bunch of music habits I wanted to develop. And then instead I got obsessed with Web3. I've gone down this like Web3 rabbit hole, which has totally tanked my discipline about music habits, but whatever.
Enjoy basically your musician, let the pressure off. So you found a new hobby. That's okay.
That's true. Just beware of developing new interests, I say, ironically.
Check in with yourself as an artist. Where am I right now? Am I mid-album cycle? Am I post-album? Am I post-single production? Like, where are you as an artist? Have you written all the songs you feel like you're going to write this year? Have you feel like you haven't written a song in 5 years and you're feeling low about that? Check in, see where you're at. Set a goal. Develop the action plan for how you're going to get to that goal, whether it's one of these insane creative challenges that we just threw your way, whether it's something super manageable, like 5 minutes a day of just sitting down with an instrument and being with it and practicing it, whatever it is, set those goals, the action plan for how you're going to get there, and then check in with yourself in 30 days. What has worked for you? What hasn't worked for you? How can you evolve? How can you shift? But one thing is, if you set those action plans, if you set that stuff in motion, keep on yourself, because in 3 days, you're going to be like, oh, wow, I actually feel different as an artist, mentally, spiritually, like all of that stuff. So my advice.
Totally. Yeah. So we gave a lot of tips and challenges and stuff. I'm sure there's hundreds more. And so if anyone watching or listening wants to call into our listener line with your own suggestions and experiences about how you've broken out of creative ruts or habits you've adopted to get more productive, give us a call. Our listener line is 360-524-2209. There, it's on the screen for those watching. 360-524-2209. And try to keep your message under 3 minutes, hopefully under 2 minutes if you can. But we'd love to hear from you. With that, any final words?
Cowabunga.
Cowabunga. And we'll see you next time where we're going to talk to one of our designers here at CD Baby about the 3 or 4 main elements of cover art design and how you can think about it and integrate it into your own music artwork.
Thanks, Chris.
See you then.